March 22nd, 1916. The Atlantic, off the west coast of Ireland. A rusting 3,200-ton collier is steaming alone, low in the water, no escort, no visible weapons. At 7 o'clock in the morning, a torpedo track cuts through the swell and misses her bow by feet. Any sane merchant captain turns for port. This one holds course and speed as if nothing happened. 20 minutes later, a German U-boat surfaces 1,000 yards behind her and fires a warning shot across the bow. The freighter stops, steam vents from her sides. A lifeboat drops into the water, crammed with sailors rowing away in open panic, leaving their ship to her fate. The submarine closes to finish her off with the deck gun. That's when the freighter kills her. None of it was an accident. The trap had been built into the ship from the keel up, and the crew had rehearsed the panic on deck for weeks. This is the story of the Q-ship, and of the merchant captain who used it to become one of the most decorated officers in British naval history. By late 1915, Britain had a problem it couldn't solve by building more warships. German U-boats were sinking merchant shipping faster than it could be replaced, and a submerged submarine holding a torpedo at range was almost impossible to see or stop. The Royal Navy had destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, and almost none of them could do anything about a periscope that dived the moment it was spotted. Depth charges existed, but were unreliable this early in the war, and rarely used correctly. Convoying, which would eventually solve the crisis, had been rejected by an admiralty and a merchant fleet that both preferred ships to sail independently. Britain needed something that could force a U-boat to surface and come close enough to kill with a gun, and it needed to build it from ships that already existed. The answer came from the U-boat's own rulebook. Under the prize regulations Germany was still nominally following in 1915 and early 1916, a submarine attacking an unarmed merchant ship was supposed to surface, stop the vessel, and let the crew abandon ship before sinking her, usually with the deck gun rather than an expensive torpedo. That procedural habit was the opening the Admiralty needed. If a U-boat commander believed his target was defenseless, he would surface and close the range himself, no torpedo required. So the Royal Navy built a ship that looked defenseless in every way and was lethal in every way that mattered. Naval officers who first heard the idea were skeptical, for good reason. A merchant ship can't fight. It has no armor, no fire control system, no gun crews standing at action stations, and a civilian silhouette any German lookout would recognize as harmless. Converting a handful of tramp steamers and colliers into warships sounded, to much of the officer corps, like theater rather than strategy. The ships themselves were slow, some barely making 10 knots, built for cargo capacity rather than survivability, with none of the compartmentalization or protection of a real warship. If the deception failed even once, the crew would be sitting on an unarmored hull within point-blank range of a submarine's deck gun, with nowhere to run and no speed to escape. Worse, the whole idea depended on a kind of discipline no Navy had ever asked of ordinary sailors. Watching your own ship take a torpedo hit, watching men row away in a staged panic, and standing motionless behind a false bulkhead with a loaded gun, waiting for an order, while the enemy studied you at 100 yards. One flinch, one gun crew moving too soon, and the whole thing collapsed with the ship still unarmored and now fully exposed. Navy gunnery officers doubted ordinary merchant crews could hold that discipline under fire. They were wrong, and the reason comes down to how these ships were built and who commanded them. A Q ship's effectiveness had less to do with firepower than with concealment and acting, both drilled until they felt closer to procedure than performance. The guns were nothing exotic, typically 3 to 5 12-pounders already in Royal Navy service. What mattered was where they were hidden. Deckhouses had hinged or collapsible sides that dropped away in seconds to expose a gun mount underneath. Lifeboats had false bottoms, concealing a weapon and its crew. Crates stacked on deck were empty shells built around a gun barrel. Farnborough, a former merchant collier of 3,200 gross tons, carried 5 12-pounders behind concealment like this, crewed by Royal Navy gunners dressed as merchant sailors. Concealment alone couldn't lure a cautious U-boat commander in close, though. That took the panic party. A small group of the crew trained to abandon ship convincingly the moment a torpedo struck or a warning shot landed. They rowed away in disorder, left personal items floating, and sometimes towed a stuffed dummy in an officer's uniform to look like the captain going down with his ship. Meanwhile, the real gun crews lay flat behind their hidden mounts, out of sight of any periscope, waiting. Lieutenant Commander Gordon Campbell, who commanded Farnborough, drilled this routine relentlessly and timed every stage against the clock, because it all depended on a U-boat captain believing what he saw was real, right up until the white ensign went up the mast and the guns opened fire from 30 feet away. At 7 o'clock on the morning of March 22, 1916, the German submarine U-68, on her first war patrol under Kapitän Lieutenant Ludwig Gunzel, fired a torpedo at Farnborough that missed narrowly ahead of the bow. Campbell gave no order to react. Farnborough held her course and speed, playing the part of a merchant ship that hadn't noticed how close she'd come to dying. 20 minutes later, U-68 surfaced roughly 1,000 yards astern, moved up on the port quarter, and fired a warning shot across the bow, the standard procedure before sinking an unarmed vessel with the deck gun. Farnborough stopped. Steam blew off from her sides. A boat went into the water with the panic party rowing hard away, exactly as drilled. U-68 closed the range, unhurried and confident, coming in to finish off what looked like an abandoned, defenseless collier. At 800 yards, Campbell gave the order. The white ensign broke out at the masthead. Concealment panels dropped away. 3 of Farnborough's 5 12-pounders opened rapid fire almost point blank. 21 rounds went out in seconds, and several hit the submarine before she could dive. As U-68 began going under, Campbell steered Farnborough over her last known position and released a depth charge, blowing the submarine's bow back to the surface, the first successful use of a depth charge in combat. The gunners scored 5 more hits on the exposed conning tower before Campbell dropped 2 further charges. U-68 sank with all 38 men aboard. Campbell was promoted to commander and awarded the Distinguished Service Order. If you're enjoying this look at how the Royal Navy actually ran this deception campaign, a quick subscribe helps the channel and means you won't miss the next one. Farnborough's second action, 11 months later, tested the acting to a degree no crew had faced before. On February 17, 1917, roughly 100 miles southwest of Queenstown, Campbell spotted a torpedo track approaching from U-83, commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Bruno Hoppe. This time, Campbell didn't evade. His standing order was to hold course and let the torpedo strike, because a hit that appeared to genuinely cripple the ship was more convincing than a near miss. The torpedo struck aft, near the engine room bulkhead, and the panic party went overboard in what witnesses described as deliberately ragged, chaotic disorder, exactly what a real crew abandoning a doomed ship would look like. Hoppe, though, was cautious. He'd heard of Q ships and refused to surface fully, studying Farnborough through his periscope for nearly half an hour, watching a ship that was visibly damaged but somehow not sinking, its lifeboats crewed by men who whispered to each other rather than shouted. At one point, the sailors in the boats could hear the periscope cutting the water and had to stay silent so as not to give away that the ship was still crewed. Only after that long, suspicious study did Hoppe decide the ship was harmless and bring U-83 fully to the surface, barely 100 yards from Farnborough's hull. Campbell gave the order to fire. Of the roughly 45 rounds Farnborough's guns put into the submarine at that range, nearly all of them hit. U-83 sank with the loss of 35 of her 37 crew. Farnborough herself was so badly damaged by the original torpedo strike that she had to be taken under tow and beached to keep her from sinking. Campbell was awarded the Victoria Cross for what the citation called the supreme test of naval discipline, ordering his own crew to stand motionless through a torpedo strike and a half hour of enemy scrutiny, unarmed and exposed, on the strength of a plan that depended entirely on nobody breaking first. The wider campaign never matched the scale of the U-boat threat it was built to answer, and it's worth being honest about that. Britain commissioned roughly 366 Q ships across the war, of which 61 were lost. Across around 150 recorded engagements, they were credited with sinking approximately 14 U-boats outright and damaging perhaps 60 more, a strike rate that came in well under 10% of all German submarines destroyed during the war, behind ordinary minefields as a weapon of attrition. Naval historians after the war judged the concept overrated, relative to what it cost in trained crews and specialist ships, but raw kill counts miss what the Q ship actually did to the war at sea. For years, a U-boat commander approaching any unescorted merchant vessel couldn't assume she was what she appeared to be. That uncertainty forced German captains to choose between the prize rules that gave crews a chance to abandon ship and firing a torpedo blind from submerged range without warning, at a target they couldn't verify. Many chose the torpedo, and that shift is part of what eventually pushed German policy toward the unrestricted submarine warfare that helped bring the United States into the war in 1917. The Q ship rarely needed to fire to matter. It needed to exist, and to occasionally, unpredictably, turn out to be real. Gordon Campbell went on to command 2 further Q ships, Pargest and Dunraven, sinking another U-boat and fighting one of the most fiercely contested actions of the war before Dunraven finally went down under her own colors. He finished the war with a Victoria Cross, a Distinguished Service Order with 2 bars, and a reputation as the most successful Q ship captain the Royal Navy produced. Farnborough herself, the collier nobody would have looked at twice in any British port, sank 2 submarines, survived a torpedo strike meant to kill her, and fired the first depth charge used in anger. None of it took a heavier gun than any other merchantman could have carried, or armor plate, or extra speed. It took a captain willing to let his own ship be hit, a crew willing to abandon her convincingly, while trained gunners lay motionless and unseen nearby, and the patience to wait, sometimes half an hour with an enemy periscope studying every detail, for the moment the lie got close enough to kill.